Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us, Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions concerning this watch. Today we discuss the atypical Panerai. Yes, it's a Luminor, but beyond that, I would say this appeals more to the kind of person who's looking for a sporty Jaeger-LeCoultre or a complicated IWC, because if you are a Paneristo, you realize that less is more with Panerai, and this 2021 limited edition of 300 pieces is a more is more watch. So you're looking at the Panerai Luminor Perpetual Calendar GMT PAM00742 Gold Tech. It is a type of red gold that is equivalent to Hublot's King Gold, Omega's Sedna, and Rolex's Everose, but more on that in a moment. It's a large watch, as Panerai Luminor timepieces tend to be, 44 millimeters in diameter, thinner than you might expect at 15.4 millimeters thick, and then 53.6 from lug to lug, with a 24 millimeter spacing in between the lugs. We'll throw it on my wrist of 16 centimeters circumference, and you can see it's large, but it's not too big. With Panerai watches, I always tell people just exclude the lugs, because the lugs are always oversized and overhanging. You judge the size and the fit of a Panerai based on where the case is relative to the edge of your wrist. So if you take the lugs out of the equation and you look down the barrel, which is the best angle if you're trying to size a watch for yourself without a mirror, you can see that the case is quite far inboard of the edge of my wrist, even over the top, which exaggerates the width of a watch. So this is fine. I think you could probably wear this on a wrist my size or larger, 16 centimeters circumference and up, with no problems. Because it is a micro rotor automatic, it winds up being thinner than you'd expect, and it has a relatively stepped and sloped case flank, so it should slide underneath dress cuffs. Maybe not the tightest of dress sleeves, but definitely jackets. The strap, sort of aged ultramarine matte blue. You've got Panerai, Officine Panerai, one and then the other, the full name of the company. We have strakes molded in, hollows on the bottom. All of that makes this a much softer strap. It is a Panerai factory strap with no crimping, no gouging. We've got a Gold Tech red gold trapezoidal pin buckle, which is very common on Panerai watches, and you can see it's fixed to the strap using screws and bars, and the strap is fixed to the case using screws and bars. So the Panerai has become more reliant on spring bars in recent years. This older, more durable, and more expensive method will be a breath of fresh air to Paneristi, a bit burned out on some of the recent snapback case models with Valfleurier movements and spring bar lugs. This is a full-fat Panerai, and you will find that if you are that Paneristo who's a purist, again, probably not going to go for a high complication like this, but if you do take the plunge, then you're going to find that your Panerai jeweler's screwdrivers that you use for strap swapping open up a world of opportunities. Check Panerai straps on Instagram, and you will discover that there are more OEM and aftermarket and full custom straps made for Panerai watches than likely every other brand combined in the luxury watch space. The case is all Gold Tech. So what is Gold Tech? Well, it's a red gold, so it's very copper intensive. So 18 karat gold, which means 75% gold, then 24% copper, then about 0.4% platinum, with a few other tertiary ingredients that aren't evident in and of themselves, but they prevent oxidation and tarnish and fading over time. So like the Hublot King Gold, Omega Sedna, Rolex Everose, not only is it particularly red, but it is particularly stable against the elements. It will not change its color over time. You can also appreciate that the case is mostly satin finished, which is in good taste for a very large colored gold watch, and that this is what was once known as the Luminor 1950 case, in contrast to the 1990s Panerai case designed by Alessandro Bettarini. The 1950 case, which came out on the PAM007 in 2002 for the modern era, it's truer to the original 1950s 6152 combat watches. So that's what's meant by the 1950 case. We have the device protecting the crown, which is probably the single most iconic crown guard ever made. Really, you know what make and what model just by seeing that. The genesis of this idea, created in the late 40s, implemented in the 50s, was that the old Rolex-manufactured Panerai 3646 watches, they had oyster cases and screw-down oyster crowns. Well, on short power reserve manual wind watches, that meant you were constantly screwing the crown in and out to wind it and set it, which would wear out the stem tube assembly and the seals. So on a water-resistant watch, that was a serious problem. So Panerai had a solution, a locking lever that would merely decompress and compress the crown seal. No threading through. As soon as you lift it, you're ready to wind, you're ready to set. Another impressive advantage is that not only do you preserve your crown seal, but you get all aspect protection. A shouldered crown guard still leaves the crown vulnerable to a perpendicular hit. This doesn't. And it's also hard to jump in the water with your crown unlocked, as this is pretty easy to notice. A screw down crown backed out half a turn or a turn, that can be easy to miss. This is a lot harder to miss. You can also see that inside the lobe, since about 2007, there's been a little runner bearing that makes the action more fluid. On the dial, we have quite a bit going on, and at first glance it's deceptively simple, but this is much more than a date. So the first thing to note is that we do have this coaxial indicator with an AM/PM indication and then running seconds. We also have a day and a date, and then when you don't need the secondary time zone, you can more or less cover it up. We've got 2 hour hands. One of them, with the triangular index, is the remote time, the place where you're not, and that is keyed to the AM/PM indicator. And then you've got your local hour, which you can back up to and fro, even with the date relatively well protected against stupid stunts. This is one of the most foolproof perpetual calendars you will find. A quick look at how the 0 reset second system works. Take a look at the seconds. Now, when I pull the crown out and I hack everything and I stop the movement, it synchronizes the seconds hand to 60, so I can easily set it to the second against a reference time. You can also appreciate that although this is a complicated Panerai, Panerai doesn't give you more of the perpetual calendar than you really need. On the reverse of the watch, we have a coaxial display of the month and the leap year phase, and then below that, the year, the decade, the century, and the millennium, all things you do not need when you are looking at your watch. Then we also have a power reserve indicator that rotates. That's for the 3-day power reserve. Jumping back to the dial side, because it is a perpetual calendar, it can navigate the idiosyncrasies of the Gregorian calendar, being able to handle irregular length months and leap years without requiring any resetting. And it won't require any resetting until the year 2100. So you've got a dual time function, 0 reset seconds, a blue metallic sunburst dial with rose gold hands, and then we've got stencil style sandwich dial construction. So you have this stencil with the numerals and the indices on top of a solid disc of luminova, which is very similar to how historic Panerai watches would have been constructed. Those would have used radioactive lume. This uses luminova, and you can see it is extensively lumed. Not only the local and secondary time zone, but the running seconds and the AM/PM indicator. And because we do have that stencil on top of the base, you can see all those little lumed indices and numerals have some depth to them. So you can see how the mechanism works right here. Rolling it around, and by the way, you can travel jumping time zones without stopping the watch. Notice how it continues to tick. This is an excellent traveler's watch, a GMT and a perpetual calendar. Flipping it over, the reason this watch isn't as thick as you'd expect is the Panerai caliber 4100. So it is a micro rotor automatic, which keeps the rotor and the winding system in the same plane as the rest of the drivetrain. So it keeps the watch very thin. And you do have a 4 Hz beat rate, perpetual calendar, GMT, power reserve indicator, 72 hours of power reserve. It is a twin barrel movement, and all of this is 50 meters water resistant. With a locking crown or a screw down crown, a 50-meter rating is enough for surface swimming. So don't take this down to depth, but you can absolutely swim with this watch. The timepiece has a full balance bridge and a free sprung balance to make it tough like a sports watch should be. It pivots on 55 joules. The movement properly sized for a large case, 35.1 millimeters in diameter and only about 6 millimeters thick. It's actually quite thin for what it is. And it is a good-looking movement. The finish is mechanically applied but handsome, neat, and at least in the case of the brushed finish, also kind of true to the old Rolex Codebert and Angelus SF240 movements. So a lovely Panerai that's more for the complicated sports watch fan than the hardcore Paneristo. But if you've already got a lot of two-hand manual wind and historic Panerai models, maybe it's time to step up to a complication. After all, if you want to keep your collection all Panerai, you wouldn't want to be showing up with a JLC, a Zenith, or an IWC. And if you are buying one of those watches, maybe consider Panerai next time. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.